Hi, thanks for joining us in our discussion of precipitation measurements. And in this video, we're going to talk about snow measurements. And specifically, we are going to look at accumulation gauges. So there are a number of different types of ways of measuring snow. We're going to start out with the snow gauge. The snow gauge is an instrument for measuring the vertical depth of the snow. Typically, the snow gauge is a standard National Weather Service 8-inch rain gauge. It is, of course, non-recording. It has to be recorded manually. What we do when we measure snow using the standard rain gauge, or the standard rain gauge, is we take out the funnel and also the measuring tube in the center, and then let the snow fall into just an empty can for the most part. And snow is collected in that can. That's the overflow can section of the rain gauge. Here is some pictures of a snow measurement being done at the Grand Forks National Weather Service. They are very unfortunate to have two cans, one they keep inside and one they leave outside. So when it's time to make a snow measurement, they go outside with one can and they swap them out. And they put the new can in there, they bring the one with the snow inside, they measure it, and then they let it melt. And then they can get the snowfall water equivalent. So what the snow gauge measures, it can measure the snow depth, or actually the snowfall, not the depth, but the snowfall. And also if you let the water or the snow melt, you can get the water equivalent, the snowfall water equivalent, by, of course, bringing it inside and letting it melt. There's also an alternative process if you're in a hurry and need to get that snow melted very quickly. What you do is you get a certain amount of water, measure that water in a measuring tube, in the National Weather Service measuring tube, make sure it's hot, and then pour it in. And then after everything melts, take out that amount of water and then make a measurement. The way we measure, we use a stick, and that stick measures to the nearest 1/100th of an inch of precipitation or water equivalent. Problems are that, of course, it's a very small can, so you may underestimate the amount of snowfall because, once again, it's a very small point measurement. And of course, a lot of times snow does vary over a region, even over a backyard. So there are some difficulties in sampling. The next type of accumulation gauge we're going to talk about is the snow sampler or snow tube. And basically this is just a hollow tube that we use to measure snow. And typically the snow that we measure is snow depth. In other words, what's on the ground already. And there's some very expensive ones. There's this one called the Mount Rose Snow Sampler, which is either made of steel or aluminum. It has an internal diameter of almost 5 inches, 4.85 inches. And it has a longitudinal slots where you can clean out the snow after you're done measuring. Comes with a spring scale for measuring the weight and therefore the snow density. And also it has at the very bottom a cutting lip so it can penetrate through many layers of snow. Also, as I mentioned, it has the longitudinal slots so you can clear out the old snow. And then it also has accessory wrenches for assembling and also driving this system into the snow. It comes in short sections. How short? About 30 inches each, which is almost 3 feet. And each of these sections is threaded, so you can assemble them together, disassemble them for transportation, but when you get to the location you want to make a snow measurement, assemble them all together, and then drive the snow sampler into the snow, down through the snow to measure the snow depth. Typically comes with 10 sections, so you can or more actually, more than 10 sections. So you can measure down to 30 feet of snow. This is usually done in mountainous areas in the western United States for hydrology. They try and figure out the snow water equivalent and the runoff that they're going to get from the melting of snow. So what this device measures, it measures snow depth. In other words, how deep the snow is on the ground. and then also the water equivalent of that by measuring it and coming up with a snow density, and then therefore a water equivalent. Another type of snow measuring device is the snow sampler. And it's kind of funny. This one is an automotive part, believe it or not. It's a lot cheaper than the Mount Rose snow sampler. The Mount Rose is very expensive. It's specifically made for measuring snowfall or snow depth in mountainous areas, and it's very high tech. This, you go down to Midas or go down to Walmart, get a nice straight section of muffler pipe, and then cut the end of it so that it's very jagged so that it can go down through the snow. This is used at some National Weather Services. Believe it or not, the internal diameter of a muffler pipe is the same as a measuring tube from an 8-inch rain gauge, believe it or not. So this is kind of a McGuire type of system. It's homemade and it's designed just to get the job done, and it's very cheap. As I mentioned, it measures it fits exactly the measuring tube from an 8-inch National Weather Service. It does a core sample, collects a sample, bring it inside, turn it upside down, put it on top of the measuring tube, let it melt, and then you'll get yourself the snow depth water equivalent. In other words, the water equivalent of the snow on the ground. Another type of measuring device is the snow stake or snow scale. Basically what this is, it's a stake. It's driven into the ground, and it's a ruler that's attached to the stake, and it measures, it's calibrated here in the United States in inches. We're probably the only country that still uses inches. Other countries use centimeters. But basically it measures the snow depth on the ground for the season. As the snow falls, you can go out and take a look and see how deep it is. Usually this is put in an open field where you can actually easily read it. As you can see, this one is bolted. It has very big numbers, which is very helpful for seeing at a distance. This is the one that's used at the National Weather Service in Grand Forks. And it's bolted to an angle iron that's set into the ground. And of course, as I mentioned, it's put in a representative area where there's no obstructions. Yardsticks can also be used. I've seen that in the Grand Forks Weather Observing Facility out at the airport. They actually do put Menards sticks in several areas to get a quick estimate, being able to look at 3 or 4 different yardsticks and then averaging the snowfall or the snow depth. The one thing you want to do is when you're putting these out, make sure that you know where the drifts were in the previous year. So you try and avoid drifts and try and get a representative sample. And the last one we're going to talk about is the snowboard. And the snowboard is a specially constructed board. It's used to identify the surface of snow or ice that has been covered by more recent snowfall. So this measures snowfall, new snowfall. And it's a white board. Here you can see an example of a National Weather Service employee with a snowboard and no snow on it. But it helps you get a good sample of solid precipitation when the snow that is falling in the gauge is considered erroneous. You're not really quite sure what's going into that 8-inch gauge. So you break out your measuring stick and go out and measure the snowboard. This is what it looks like at the National Weather Service. They actually have a concrete pad and the snowboard is on top of the concrete pad. It's not fastened to it. It's just a board, basically. So it gives you a reference for measuring new snow. And usually it's constructed of either wood or thin metal, but most days now it is made of some sort of plastic. And these are the types of plastic sheets that you can get either at Menards or also at Joann Fabrics, believe it or not. And the idea is to put it right on top of the snow or just slightly below the snow, about the same depth as the thickness of the board, so it's flush with the top of the snow. And it says here 40 by 40 centimeter, that's 16 by 16 inches. I think the one that we use at the airport is more like 12 by 12 inches, but it should be white so that solar radiation does not melt the snow. If you paint it black, then you'll get a little bit of heating and a little bit of melting. And the procedural standard is to measure the snowboard every 6 hours unless you have a heavy snowfall event. If you have a heavy snowfall event, then you want to go out at a minimum at least once per hour to measure the snow. After every measurement, you should clear the board and then measure the new snow at the next observation. Our measurements are made to the nearest 1/10 of an inch of precipitation, or if you are not in the United States, every place else measures it in centimeters. So that's a little bit about snowfall measurements, and in future videos we'll talk about devices that automatically record snowfall.